Victor Kane was the kind of man who believed in order above all else. He had spent years climbing the ranks at Celestial Heights, a luxury hotel perched on an orbital space station high above Earth. The hotel wasn't just any ordinary place. It catered to the ultra-rich, those who could afford vacations among the stars. With its shimmering glass walls, gravity-defying gardens, and holographic concierge services, it was a symbol of wealth and exclusivity. As the manager, Victor prided himself on keeping things perfect. Every detail mattered to him, from the crisp uniforms of the staff to the way guests walked through the lobby as if they owned the galaxy. To Victor, Celestial Heights wasn't just a job, it was his life's masterpiece. And today, like every other day, he strode through the grand marble lobby with a clipboard tucked under one arm, inspecting everything with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The lobby buzzed with activity. Wealthy tourists sipped exotic drinks served by robotic waiters while children played with floating toys powered by anti-gravity tech. Business people huddled in corners discussing deals worth billions. It was a scene of opulence, but something caught Victor's attention, a small figure sitting quietly in one of the oversized chairs near the entrance. At first glance, she looked out of place. She couldn't have been older than 12 or 13. Her navy blue blazer and yellow tie marked her as a student, not a guest. A sketch pad rested on her lap, and her pencil moved steadily across the page, creating lines and shapes that Victor couldn't see from where he stood. But what bothered him most was her presence itself. Why would a child be here? Surely someone so young didn't belong in such an exclusive environment. He frowned deeply, his lips pressing into a thin line. Crossing the lobby, he approached, the girl with long strides, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. When he reached her, he cleared his throat loudly to get her attention. She looked up, startled, her dark brown eyes meeting his stern gaze. "What are you doing here?" Victor asked sharply, towering over her. His tone carried no warmth, only authority. The girl blinked once, then twice, before answering calmly. "I'm waiting for my mom," she said softly, clutching her sketchpad tighter. "She told me to meet her here." Victor raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Your mom?" he repeated, glancing around the room as if expecting some invisible adult to appear and vouch for her story. "And who might your mother be?" "She works here," the girl replied simply. There was no hint of defiance in her voice, only honesty. Victor snorted. "Works here? As what, one of our cleaning staff?" "No," the girl said firmly, though her cheeks flushed slightly. "She's important." Victor rolled his eyes dramatically. Of course she'd say that. Kids always did when they got caught somewhere they shouldn't be. He leaned down closer, his face inches from hers. "Listen carefully," he said coldly. "This is a private establishment. We don't allow loitering, especially by people who clearly don't belong. If you don't leave now, I'll call security." For a moment, the girl stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, without saying another word, she stood up, gathering her things. She slipped her sketch pad into her bag and slung it over her shoulder. As she turned to walk away, Victor noticed something. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. Whether it was fear or anger, he couldn't tell, but it didn't matter to him. All that mattered was that she was leaving. "Good riddance," he muttered, under his breath as he watched her go. She disappeared through the revolving doors, blending into the crowd outside. Satisfied with himself, Victor straightened his tie and returned to his duties, already forgetting about the encounter. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, or rather, the artificial daylight system had dimmed to simulate nighttime, Victor sat in his office reviewing reports. He liked this part of the day best, when the chaos of the lobby quieted down and he could focus on paperwork. Everything seemed normal until his assistant, Clara, knocked on his door. "Mr. Kane," Clara said hesitantly, stepping inside. "There's someone asking to speak with you. They say it's urgent." Victor sighed, setting aside his tablet. "Who is it?" Clara hesitated again, shifting uncomfortably. Well, it's Dr. Carter. She says she wants to discuss an issue regarding the hotel." Victor froze. Dr. Elena Carter was the founder and CEO of Celestial Group, the company that owned the entire chain of hotels, including this one. Though he'd never met her personally, he knew enough about her reputation to feel uneasy. She was known for being brilliant, driven, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting her business interests. "Send her in," Victor said quickly, smoothing his hair and adjusting his tie once more. Moments later, the door opened, and a tall, elegant woman entered. She wore a sleek black suit, her posture confident yet relaxed. Behind her trailed the same girl from earlier, the schoolgirl Victor had thrown out. Victor's stomach dropped. For a split second, he considered pretending not to recognize her, but it was too late. The girl pointed directly at him, speaking clearly despite her earlier shyness. "That's him, Mom," she said. "That's the man who kicked me out." Victor felt the blood drain from his face. He stammered, trying to explain, but Elena held up a hand to silence him. Her piercing gaze locked onto his, and for the first time in years, Victor felt truly afraid. "We need to talk," Elena said coolly, taking a seat across from him. "About how you treat people who come into this hotel, and whether you deserve to keep your position." As Victor sank back into his chair, dread washing over him, he realized one thing. He had made a terrible mistake. And now, he was about to pay for it. Word count, 980. Victor Kane's mind raced as he sat across from Dr. Elena Carter, the woman who could make or break his career with a single word. Her presence was commanding yet calm, and her sharp gaze seemed to pierce right through him. Beside her, the schoolgirl Maya stood, quietly, her arms crossed over her chest. Though she looked younger than most of the guests who frequented Celestial Heights, there was a quiet strength in her posture that made Victor feel even smaller. Elena leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the desk. "Mr. Kane," she began, her voice smooth but firm. "Do you recognize my daughter?" Victor swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He glanced at Maya, then back at Elena, trying to piece together what had just happened. I didn't know she was your daughter," he stammered. "She was sitting in the lobby earlier, and I assumed—" "You assumed incorrectly," Elena interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her tone remained level, but there was an edge to it now, like the warning growl of a predator. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Kane. My daughter came here today because we were supposed to meet for lunch. She arrived early and decided to wait in the lobby while sketching, a hobby of hers. Instead of welcoming her, you judged her based on her appearance and dismissed her without even bothering to verify her story." Victor opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He knew anything he said would sound hollow, especially since Elena was absolutely right. He had jumped to conclusions, assuming Maya didn't belong simply because she wasn't dressed like the other guests. In his defense, he'd always believed the hotel's exclusivity depended on maintaining strict boundaries, but now, faced with the consequences of his actions, he realized how badly he'd misjudged the situation. "I'm sorry," he finally managed to say, though the apology felt weak even to his own ears. "If I had known." "But that's the point, isn't it?" Elena interjected, leaning back in her chair. "You didn't bother to find out. You saw a young girl in a school uniform and immediately decided she didn't fit the image you wanted for this hotel. Tell me, Mr. Kane, do you think Celestial Heights exists only for people who look a certain way or wear certain clothes? Because if that's true, then perhaps you're not the right person to manage such an establishment." The weight of her words hit Victor like a punch to the gut. He had spent years building his reputation as someone who upheld standards, but now those same standards were being used against him. For the first time, he wondered whether he had been too rigid, too focused on appearances instead of substance. Before Victor could respond, Maya spoke up. "Mom, it's okay," she said softly, glancing at Victor. "He probably didn't mean to be rude. He just made a mistake." Elena raised an eyebrow at her daughter, clearly surprised by the show of leniency. "A mistake?" she repeated, turning back to Victor. "Is that what this is? A simple misunderstanding?" Victor nodded quickly, desperate to salvage whatever scraps of dignity he had left. Yes, exactly. It was a misunderstanding. I assure you, Dr. Carter, it won't happen again. I'll personally ensure that every guest and visitor is treated with respect moving forward. For a moment, Elena studied him carefully, as if weighing whether to believe him. Then she sighed, shaking her head. I hope so, Mr. Kane. Because, let me be clear, this isn't just about my daughter. This hotel represents everything I've worked for: diversity, inclusivity, innovation. If you can't embody those values, then you have no place here. With that, she stood up, signaling the end of their conversation. Maya followed suit, giving Victor one last glance before walking out of the office behind her mother. As the door clicked shut, Victor slumped back in his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like a ship caught in a storm, tossed around by forces beyond his control. Later that night, unable to sleep, Victor replayed the events of the day in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Maya's face, the hurt and embarrassment he'd caused her. He had always prided himself on running a flawless operation, but now he wondered if he'd been blind to the bigger picture. Was it possible that his obsession with perfection had blinded him to the humanity of the people around him? Determined to prove himself, Victor resolved to change. Starting tomorrow, he would pay closer attention to how he interacted with guests and staff alike. No more snap judgments, no more assumptions. He owed it to Elena, not just because she was his boss, but because she had shown him a side of himself he hadn't wanted to see. The next morning, Victor arrived at work earlier than usual, determined to start fresh. As he walked through the lobby, he noticed Maya standing near the front desk, chatting with Clara, his assistant. She looked different today, more confident, almost radiant. When she spotted him, she hesitated for a moment, then approached him cautiously. "Good morning, Mr. Kane," she said politely, meeting his eyes. "Good morning, Maya," Victor replied, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," she said, shrugging. "My mom told me you apologized, so thanks for that." Victor nodded, relieved that she seemed willing to give him another chance. "You're welcome. And I meant what I said. I'll do better going forward, you have my word." Maya smiled faintly, then turned to leave, but not before adding, "Just remember, everyone deserves a fair shot, even kids like me." Her words lingered in Victor's mind long after she disappeared into the crowd. They weren't accusatory, just honest. A reminder that he still had much to learn. Over the next few days, Victor threw himself into improving the hotel's culture. He held meetings with the staff, emphasizing the importance of treating all guests with kindness and respect. He implemented new training programs designed to address unconscious biases and foster inclusivity. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere at Celestial Heights began to shift. Meanwhile, Maya became a regular visitor at the hotel, often stopping by after school to spend time with her mother. Each time Victor saw her, he made a point of greeting her, warmly, asking about her sketches or sharing stories about his own childhood. To his surprise, she responded positively, even laughing at his jokes occasionally. It was a small victory, but it gave him hope that he was on the right path. One afternoon, as Victor watched Maya sketching in the lobby, he realized something important. She wasn't just a girl in a school uniform anymore. She was a reminder of the lesson he'd learned, that appearances could be deceiving, and that true leadership meant seeing past surface-level differences to connect with people on a deeper level. And for the first time in a long while, Victor felt proud not of the hotel but of himself. Word count 1,000. The weeks that followed Victor Kane's encounter with Maya and Dr. Elena Carter were a blur of self-reflection, awkward apologies, and attempts to rebuild trust, not just with Maya, but with everyone who worked at or visited Celestial Heights. Victor knew he couldn't undo what had happened, but he was determined to prove that he could change. He started small, making an effort to greet each guest personally, no matter how busy he was. He even took time to chat with the cleaning staff during their breaks, asking about their families and lives outside the hotel. It wasn't easy. Years of rigid behavior didn't disappear overnight. But slowly, people began to notice a difference in him. Elena, however, wasn't satisfied yet. She hadn't called Victor out publicly for his mistake. She wanted to teach him a lesson without humiliating him completely, but she also wasn't ready to let him off the hook. She decided to test him further, pushing him to confront his biases head-on. And so she devised a plan, one that would force Victor to face the consequences of his actions while giving him a chance to redeem himself. One morning, as Victor walked through the lobby reviewing the day's schedule, Clara approached him with a message. "Mr. Kane," she said hesitantly, holding a tablet in her hands. "There's a group of inspectors arriving later today. They're here to evaluate the hotel's compliance with corporate diversity standards." Victor frowned, his stomach tightening. Inspectors? This wasn't part of the usual routine. "What kind of inspectors?" he asked, flipping through the digital report on the tablet. "They're from HQ," Clara explained. "Apparently they'll be conducting interviews with staff and observing interactions with guests." Dr. Carter herself approved the visit. Victor's heart sank. Of course this was Elena's doing. She must have arranged it to keep tabs on him. Still, there was nothing he could do except prepare for their arrival. For the rest of the morning, he drilled the staff on proper etiquette, emphasizing the importance of treating every guest equally. He reminded them to smile, make eye contact, and avoid making assumptions based on appearances. By the time the inspectors arrived, Victor felt as ready as he'd ever be. When the inspectors finally stepped into the lobby, Victor nearly choked on his own breath. Leading the team was none other than Maya Carter, dressed in a crisp white blouse, black slacks, and a badge clipped to her lapel that read, "Corporate Auditor." Behind her stood two adults, clearly actors hired for the role, but it was Maya who commanded attention. Her confident stride and professional demeanor transformed her entirely, leaving Victor momentarily speechless. "Good afternoon, Mr. Kane," Maya said coolly, extending a hand. "I'm Maya Carter, and these are my colleagues. We're here to conduct a comprehensive review of your management practices and customer service protocols." Victor stared at her, his mind racing. Was this some sort of joke? A prank orchestrated by Elena to embarrass him? But one look at Maya's serious expression told him otherwise. This was real, or at least it was meant to feel real. Swallowing his shock, he shook her hand firmly and forced a smile. "Welcome to Celestial Heights," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We're honored to host you." As the inspectors dispersed throughout the hotel, Maya stayed behind, clipboard in hand, and began questioning Victor directly. "Let's start with your approach to inclusivity," she said, jotting notes as she spoke. "Can you describe any recent initiatives you've implemented to ensure all guests feel welcome?" Caught off guard, Victor stumbled over his words. "Well, we've been focusing on training our staff to be more mindful of cultural differences," he stammered, "and I've personally made it a priority to interact with every guest regardless of their background." Maya raised an eyebrow skeptically. "That sounds promising," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But can you provide specific examples? Or is this just lip service?" Victor flushed, feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. He scrambled to recall instances where he'd gone out of his way to help someone, like assisting an elderly couple with their luggage or complimenting a child on their artwork. But under Maya's unrelenting gaze, his answers sounded hollow, rehearsed. Each question dug deeper into his insecurities, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth. He still had a long way to go. Throughout the day, the inspectors observed everything, from how waiters greeted customers to how housekeeping responded to requests. They staged scenarios designed to test the staff's reactions, such as sending a guest in casual clothing to book an expensive suite, or having someone pretend to lose their wallet in the lounge. Victor hovered anxiously in the background, watching as his employees navigated these challenges. To his relief, most handled themselves well, demonstrating the skills he'd emphasized during training sessions. But whenever Maya appeared, her sharp eyes scanning the room, Victor felt a wave of dread wash over him. At one point, Maya cornered him near the infinity pool, where several guests lounged beneath floating umbrellas. "Tell me, Mr. Kane," she said, lowering her voice so only he could hear, Do you think you're doing enough, or are you just trying to save face? Her words struck a nerve. Victor clenched his fists, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, he took a deep breath and replied honestly, I know I messed up, Maya. I judged you unfairly, and I regret it. But I'm trying to do better. To be better. Please believe me when I say that. For a moment, Maya studied him closely, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she nodded slightly. Okay, she said simply. Prove it. By the end of the day, Victor was exhausted, but oddly relieved. Despite the stress of being scrutinized, he realized that Maya's questions had forced him to reflect on his progress and acknowledge areas where he still fell short. As the inspectors gathered in the lobby to debrief, Maya turned to him one last time. We'll submit our findings to HQ tomorrow, she announced, her tone formal once again. Until then, consider this experience a wake-up call. You have the power to create change or to reinforce the same old patterns. The choice is yours. With that, she handed him a copy of her notes and walked away, leaving Victor standing alone in the middle of the lobby. He watched her go, a mix of admiration and frustration swirling inside him. She was right, of course. This wasn't just about passing an inspection. It was about becoming the kind of leader who inspired others to follow his example. That evening, Victor sat in his office, staring at Maya's notes. They were filled with constructive criticism, pointing out flaws in his management style while offering suggestions for improvement. At first glance, they seemed daunting, even overwhelming. But as he read through them again, he noticed something else. Hope. Each recommendation came with a solution, a path forward. For the first time, Victor saw his mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to grow. He picked up his phone and dialed Elena's number. When she answered, he wasted no time getting to the point. Dr. Carter, he said earnestly, I want to thank you for sending Maya today. I needed this. I needed to see things from a different perspective. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Elena replied, You're welcome, Victor. Just remember, actions speak louder than words. Show me, and everyone else, that you mean what you say. I will, Victor promised, his voice firm. You have my word. As he hung up, Victor leaned back in his chair, a sense of determination washing over him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while he felt ready to take it, one step at a time. Word count 1,000. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than Victor Kane expected. After Maya's inspection, he had spent weeks implementing her recommendations, working tirelessly to transform Celestial Heights into a model of inclusivity and respect. He held more training sessions for the staff, introduced policies aimed at reducing bias, and even created a feedback system where guests could anonymously report issues. But despite his efforts, he couldn't shake the feeling that Elena Carter wasn't done with him yet. His suspicions were confirmed when Clara burst into his office one morning, breathless and wide-eyed. Mr. Kane, she said, clutching a tablet. Dr. Carter is hosting a gala tonight in the Grand Ballroom. She wants you to attend and present your progress personally. Victor's stomach churned. A gala? In front of hundreds of wealthy guests and corporate executives? His first instinct was to refuse, but he knew better than to argue with Elena. If she wanted him there, he had no choice but to comply. Nodding grimly, he accepted the invitation and began preparing for what promised to be the most nerve-wracking evening of his life. By the time the gala rolled around, the Grand Ballroom was transformed into a dazzling spectacle. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering light across the room. Holographic displays floated above each table, showcasing images of Earth's natural wonders, alongside quotes about diversity and unity. Servers glided between tables, offering champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres to elegantly dressed guests who mingled and laughed under the soft hum of classical music. Victor stood near the entrance, fidgeting with his tie as he scanned the crowd. He recognized many of the attendees, CEOs, investors, celebrities, but none of them mattered as much as the woman making her way toward him now. Dr. Elena Carter entered the ballroom wearing a stunning silver gown that sparkled like starlight. Her presence commanded attention, drawing eyes from every corner of the room. Beside her walked Maya, looking equally poised in a navy blue dress that matched her school uniform. Elena greeted Victor with a polite nod. "Ready?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "As ready as I'll ever be," Victor replied, forcing a weak smile. He followed her to the stage, where a microphone awaited him. As they ascended the steps, the room fell silent, all eyes turning to watch. Elena took the microphone first, addressing the audience with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. This event celebrates not only our achievements as a company, but also our commitment to creating spaces where everyone feels valued and respected. Tonight, we'll hear from someone who has recently undergone significant personal growth, a journey sparked by an incident that reminded us all of the importance of humility and accountability." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "A few weeks ago, my daughter Maya visited this very hotel to meet me for lunch. Instead of being welcomed, she was dismissed and humiliated, all because of assumptions based on her appearance. That person responsible for this behavior was none other than Mr. Victor Kane, our esteemed manager." Gasps rippled through the crowd as heads turned to stare at Victor. Some faces showed shock, others disapproval, but none were angrier than those belonging to a group of influential philanthropists seated near the front. They had long championed causes related to equality and inclusion, and their expressions made it clear they weren't pleased. Victor felt his knees weaken, but Elena wasn't finished. However, she continued, raising a hand to quiet the murmurs. "What matters most isn't the mistake itself, it's how we respond to it." When confronted with his actions, Mr. Kane chose to listen, learn, and take meaningful steps toward change. Tonight he will share his story, not as an excuse, but as a testament to the power of redemption. With that, she handed the microphone to Victor, stepping aside to let him speak. For a moment he froze, overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. Then, taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Thank you, Dr. Carter," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "And thank you all for allowing me to address you tonight. What happened here a few weeks ago was wrong, plain and simple. I judged someone unfairly, assuming they didn't belong simply because they looked different from the image I had in my mind. I failed not only Maya, but everyone who trusts us to provide a welcoming environment." He paused, glancing at Elena and Maya before continuing. "Since then, I've worked hard to understand my mistakes and make amends. I've implemented new training programs, encouraged open dialogue among staff, and committed myself to treating every guest with dignity and respect. These changes aren't just for show. They're part of a promise I've made to become a better leader and a better person." As he spoke, Victor noticed something remarkable. The tension in the room began to ease. People nodded approvingly, some even applauding softly. Even the skeptical philanthropists seemed impressed by his sincerity. Encouraged, Victor concluded with a heartfelt plea. "I can't undo the past, but I can shape the future. And I hope that by sharing my story tonight, I inspire others to reflect on their own biases and strive for improvement. Thank you." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Elena joined him on stage, shaking his hand warmly while Maya smiled proudly from the sidelines. It was a moment of vindication, not because Victor had escaped punishment, but because he had earned forgiveness through genuine effort. After the speeches, the gala resumed, with guests returning to their conversations and meals. Victor, however, couldn't relax. He wandered through the ballroom, stopping to chat with various attendees who congratulated him on his speech. Though grateful for their support, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. Something still lingered in the air, an unspoken question about whether his transformation was truly complete. That question was answered later that night when Elena approached him during dessert. "You did well tonight," she said, sipping a glass of wine. "But don't think this means you're off the hook entirely." Victor chuckled nervously. "I wouldn't dream of it." "Good," Elena replied, her tone firm but kind. Because I have one final task for you. Starting tomorrow, you'll assist Maya in launching a foundation aimed at promoting inclusivity in hospitality industries worldwide. Consider it your chance to turn regret into action. Victor blinked, surprised but honored. I'd be happy to help, he said sincerely. Thank you for trusting me with this opportunity. Elena smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. You'll be working closely with Maya, which means she'll hold you accountable every step of the way. Behind her, Maya grinned mischievously. Oh, I'm looking forward to it, she teased, earning a laugh from both adults. As the night drew to a close, Victor reflected on everything that had transpired. From the humiliation of being called out to the triumph of earning forgiveness, he had come full circle. And though challenges lay ahead, he felt ready to face them, not as the man he once was, but as the man he was becoming. Word count, 1,000. Months passed since the gala, and Victor Kane found himself walking through the familiar halls of Celestial Heights with a renewed sense of purpose. The hotel had transformed, not just in its policies or training programs, but in its atmosphere. Guests from all walks of life mingled freely in the lobby, their laughter blending with the soft hum of music playing in the background. Staff members greeted visitors warmly, no longer judging them by appearances, but instead focusing on making each stay memorable. It was a far cry from the rigid, exclusive environment Victor once upheld, and he couldn't help but feel proud of the changes. But the journey hadn't been easy. Working alongside Maya to launch the foundation, dubbed Celestial Unity, had pushed him out of his comfort zone in ways he never imagined. At first, he struggled to keep up with Maya's energy and vision. She was determined to create something meaningful, pouring countless hours into planning workshops, designing educational materials, and securing partnerships with organizations around the globe. Her passion was infectious, and slowly, Victor began to match her enthusiasm. Together, they traveled to conferences and schools, speaking about the importance of inclusivity and hospitality. They shared stories, not just Victor's but those of others who had faced discrimination, and encouraged audiences to challenge their own biases. Each event brought new lessons and insights, reinforcing Victor's belief that change started with small, consistent actions. One evening, as the sun dipped below the artificial horizon of the orbital space station, Victor sat in his office reviewing the latest progress reports for Celestial Unity. The Foundation had already made significant strides, partnering with dozens of hotels across the galaxy to implement diversity training programs and host community events. Guest satisfaction ratings at Celestial Heights were higher than ever, and employees reported feeling more valued and respected. As he flipped through the documents, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," he called, expecting Clara with yet another stack of paperwork. Instead, Maya stepped inside, holding 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate. "You looked like you could use a break," she said, handing him one of the mugs. "Besides, I wanted to talk." Victor smiled, grateful for the interruption. "Thanks. What's on your mind?" Maya settled into the chair opposite him, cradling her mug thoughtfully. "I've been thinking, we've done a lot of good work with the Foundation, but do you think people will really change? Like for real?" Her question caught him off guard. He leaned back in his chair, considering his response carefully. "Honestly, I don't know if everyone will change. Some people are too set in their ways, but what matters is that we're planting seeds. Maybe someone hears our message today and doesn't act on it right away, but years later, when they encounter a similar situation, they remember what we said and choose differently. That's how progress happens, one person at a time." Maya nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's just hard sometimes, you know. When you see people being unfair or mean, it feels like nothing will ever get better." "I know," Victor admitted, his voice softer now. "Believe me, I've been there. But look at everything you've accomplished already. You've inspired so many people, including me, to be better. Don't underestimate the power of that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled only by the faint hum of the space station's systems outside. Then Maya grinned, breaking the mood. Well, if you're going to get all mushy on me, I should probably leave before you start crying. Victor laughed, shaking his head. Don't worry, I'll save the tears for my next motivational speech. The following week, Victor received an unexpected visit from Elena Carter. She entered his office unannounced, carrying a slim folder under one arm. Do you have a minute? She asked, taking a seat without waiting for an answer. Of course, Victor replied, gesturing for her to continue. What's this about? Elena opened the folder, revealing a series of graphs and charts detailing the hotel's performance. Metrics. We've been tracking the impact of the changes you've implemented, she explained, and I wanted to share the results with you personally. As Victor scanned the data, his eyes widened in disbelief. Guest satisfaction scores had skyrocketed, employee retention rates were at an all-time high, and revenue had increased significantly due to positive word-of-mouth referrals. Even the philanthropists who had initially doubted him were praising the hotel's commitment to inclusivity. This is incredible, Victor murmured, flipping through the pages. I had no idea. That's because you've been too busy working to notice, Elena said with a hint of pride in her voice. You've proven yourself, Victor, not just as a manager, but as a leader. And I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Victor felt a lump rise in his throat. For years he had sought validation through perfectionism and control. Now, hearing those words from Elena meant more than any award or accolade ever could. Thank you, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't have done it without you or Maya. Elena smiled faintly, closing the folder. Speaking of which, I have one last request. I'd like you to mentor other managers within the Celestial Group. Share your experiences, teach them what you've learned. We need more leaders like you. Victor hesitated, unsure if he was ready for such a responsibility. But then he remembered how much he'd grown over the past months, and how much he still had to offer. I'd be honored, he said finally, meeting her gaze with newfound confidence. In the weeks that followed, Victor threw himself into mentoring others, traveling between hotels to conduct workshops and offer guidance. He spoke openly about his mistakes, emphasizing the importance of humility and accountability. To his surprise, many of his colleagues responded positively, sharing their own struggles and seeking advice. It was humbling to realize that his story had resonated with so many people, and inspiring to see them take steps toward improvement. Meanwhile, Maya continued to lead Celestial Unity, expanding its reach and impact. Together, they became a dynamic duo, proving that even the most unlikely partnerships could spark meaningful change. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, built on mutual respect and shared goals. One evening, as Victor stood on the observation deck overlooking Earth, Maya joined him. The planet below shimmered like a jewel against the vast expanse of space, its beauty breathtaking despite its flaws. You know, Maya said after a while, sometimes I wonder if we'll ever fix everything wrong with the world. Victor glanced at her, seeing the same determination in her eyes that had driven her from the beginning. Probably not, he admitted, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. Every little bit helps, even if it's just making one person's day a little brighter. Maya smiled, leaning against the railing beside him. Yeah, I can live with that. As they gazed out at the stars, Victor felt a deep sense of peace. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Maya by his side, and Elena guiding them both, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And for the first time in his life, Victor Kane truly believed in the possibility of a better future. Word count: 1,000.